Stories Philippines Podcast.
A darkness permeates this episode, touching on scenes and themes some may find deeply unsettling. The path before us is paved with the brutal remnants of history and the spectral shadows they cast. Approach the following narrative with profound mindfulness and care. I am Paul, and you are listening to Stories Philippines podcast. The scent of pine and mist is an embrace in Baguio, a cool, gentle hand press to a feverish brow. It is meant to be a refuge, a summer capital built to escape the suffocating heat of the lowlands. But every sanctuary has its seal, and every breath of mountain air holds an unspoken truth. There are houses here that do not exist merely in wood and stone, but in a deeper, more agonizing reality. They are monuments to a trauma so widespread, so profound, that it etched itself into the very light and shadow. Imagine the feeling of a heavy, unexplained chill that has nothing to do with altitude, but everything to do with absence. It is the weight of a gaze you cannot meet, the distant echo of a terror you never lived but feel in the marrow of your bones. This is the truth of the places known as the Lapiral White House and the Bahay na Pula. They are not simply structures, they are the spectral archives of the war, bound forever to the screams, the blood, and the unspeakable silence that followed. The question is not what happened inside their walls, but rather what pieces of those horrors broke free and now roam the winding roads and the dark countryside, still seeking an ending that never came. The Lapiral White House sits like a brilliant spectral beacon along Leonard Wood Road in Bayo City. It is a house that dares you to ignore it. A Dutch colonial structure, pure white in a city of brown and gray stone, topped with a distinctive steep gable roof. It speaks of a grandeur imported from another world, a life of means and quiet dignity established in the high, cool mountains. Built sometime in the 1930s, it was a home of the prominent Lapiral family, its walls meant to shelter, to celebrate, to stand as a testament to a family's success. But that white paint, so pristine and clean, is a deceit. Beneath its surface, an older, darker pigment bleeds through, staining the very air around it. In the early 2005s, Baguio remained the city where the past was often closer than the present. A place where fog was not just weather, but a curtain that separated one reality from another. A young family from the lowlands, 11 people in all, with 2 small children, arrived for a vacation. They stayed in a borrowed townhouse near Military Cutoff, American style, complete with a chimney and an attic, the kind of place that promised comfort and new memories. They settled in easily, the mountain air filling their lungs, the first few days a blur of sightseeing and happy chaos. One afternoon, driving back from the popular tourist spots, they passed a Lapiral house. Its reputation preceded it. The older members of the group, the titos and titas, shuddered, warning them away from the notorious sight. But the younger ones, the cousins, including a woman named Rachel and her husband, were driven by a deep, modern curiosity. They had to see the infamous White House. They went the following evening, near 6 o'clock, a time when the mountain shadows begin to stretch long and the air takes on its most profound chill. The house was already a tourist stop, its eerie beauty drawing small crowds. They took their pictures, feeling a little disappointed perhaps, that the atmosphere seemed more touristy than terrifying. It was only on the walk home that the city itself seemed to turn against them. 4 of the group, including Rachel and her husband, became inexplicably lost. This was a place they had thought they knew, the roads familiar, yet they wandered for nearly 2 hours, feeling as though the very streets had shifted, played, or conspired against them. They only found their way back to the townhouse near Mines View by taking an expensive and sudden taxi ride The feeling was profound, not one of natural confusion, but of being actively misdirected, deliberately led astray. When they arrived back at the townhouse, their other two companions, who had taken a different route, were already there, unharmed and safe. Later that evening, while reviewing the pictures from the Laperal house, Rashay's husband began to joke, pointing out blurry shapes and shadows in the backgrounds, laughing at the idea of a ghostly photo bomber. But then, an abrupt, shocking sound. Rashay's stepfather, who had been outside smoking, suddenly burst through the door and ran inside, his face stripped of its usual bravado. This was a man unafraid of anything, and his terror was a palpable, icy wave. 2 minutes later, all the lights in the house died. A sudden, complete darkness fell. Rachel and her husband's cousin's wife screamed. They huddled together, praying, flashlights scanning the blackness. The two children were safe, but their aunt was praying feverishly. When the lights finally flickered back on, the decision was made. The 11 of them would sleep together in a single room. It was then their aunt confessed. Even before the others returned, she had heard the sound of a woman weeping from downstairs. Cramped together in the bedroom, the terror did not subside. They heard a loud, violent pounding from the attic, a strong, rhythmic crashing, as though something or someone was deliberately breaking things apart. Simultaneously, the weeping from below returned, a deep, desolate cry. Rashed's husband's cousin, usually loud and funny, was suddenly silent, withdrawn, his eyes vacant. He seemed to be challenging the unseen thing in the dark, a reckless defiance that unnerved them all. The aunt, sensing the escalation, sternly commanded everyone to sleep before something truly terrible happened. The question lingered and still lingers. Did the entities from the Laperal house follow them? Or was the townhouse itself haunted? Why did the phenomena only manifest on the second night of their stay? The answer is less about where the spirits reside and more about what they were responding to. They were responding to an act of disrespect, to a human presence that dared to mock their pain in the place where it was born. The Laperal White House, during the brutal Japanese occupation of the Second World War, was taken over and used as a garrison. It was a site of forced labor, torture, and murder. The ghosts there are not random specters. They are the residual energy of a national nightmare, the victims of unimaginable brutality who had their last moments violently stripped away. It is not just the Laperal family tragically murdered there, but also the countless prisoners, the innocent and the unknown who were tortured and killed. The house became a container for collective trauma. Consider the story of a young woman named Penimula years later, who often walked past the Laperal house late at night with friends after leaving a nearby club. They would walk from the club towards Session Road to catch a cheaper taxi home. Penimula, who possessed a sensitivity to the supernatural, always felt a heavy oppression along that route. One night, as they neared the house, she saw a woman out of the corner of her eye. She dismissed it as a drunk person staggering home, but when she looked directly, no one was there. As they walked past, a profound, suffocating weight fell onto her shoulders. She looked back, not with her eyes, but with a primal instinct, and saw a figure. A woman, not made of flesh, but of smoke that had solidified into a human form, trailing her steps. A second passed, and the figure vanished. The terror was so complete, she immediately diverted her group to a nearby eatery, concealing the sheer panic in her voice. Though she and her friends began to cross the street to avoid the Laperal house on their walk home, she would still catch glimpses of the smoking figure every time she passed. Another group, visiting in the summer, paid the entrance fee to see the infamous house. They found the atmosphere chilling, the interior air unnaturally cold, their neck hairs rising. The narrow staircase leading to the upper floors felt particularly oppressive. It was during a final group picture taken right in front of the main door before leaving that a friend made a throwaway, chilling joke. Take one more picture, maybe someone will photobomb you or join you. They didn't think much of it until days later when reviewing the photos. Zooming into their group picture, a distinct shadow, a dark presence was visible, confirming their friend's unsettling jest. The darkness of the Laperal house is a specific darkness. It is the echo of the Second World War, a story shared across the world, from the forests of Eastern Europe to the islands of the Pacific. It is the shadow of occupation, of power brutally exerted over the innocent, a time when human life was rendered valueless. But in the Philippines, that darkness has a distinct color and texture tied to a sense of profound and national betrayal. If the Laperal House is the spectral repository of war trauma in the cool north, its counterpart, the Bahay na Pula, the Red House, is its fiery, blood-soaked twin in the central plains of Luzon. In the flat, low-lying fields of San Ildefonso, Bulacan, stood the Bahay na Pula, or the Red House. Like the Laperal House, it was once a home of dignity and prominence. Built around 1929 and owned by Don Ramon Ilwasorio, it was a grand, beautiful mansion painted a distinctive red, a color that would come to symbolize the horrifying events that took place within its walls. In 1944, the Japanese Imperial Army seized the house, turning it into their military garrison and headquarters. It became a site of unspeakable terror. This was the dark epicenter of abuse for the surrounding areas, including the massacre in Mapanique, Pampanga. Men suspected of being members of the Hukbal Hap resistance were brought here tortured and often murdered, sometimes being skinned alive, according to local accounts. But the most enduring and painful stories are those of the women. The Bahay na Pula became a garrison for what are known as comfort women, Filipino women, and even young girls who were forcibly abducted and subjected to repeated sexual violence by the Japanese soldiers. They were confined in the house, abused relentlessly by 12 to 20 soldiers a day, sometimes more. The trauma was so complete that some women who survived attempted to take their own lives. These women, many of whom are now known as the Malaya Lolas or free grandmothers, have sought justice and recognition for decades. Their story, a national wound that refuses to heal. The house itself, now mostly a ruin, with its posts and walls collapsing, holds the psychic residue of this anguish. Locals and investigators report hearing the sounds of women screaming, weeping, and begging for help. The sheer volume of suffering seems to have charged the very structure with a terrifying, heavy energy. One paranormal investigation team, spending a night at the crumbling site, brought their equipment. The atmosphere was immediately oppressive, heavy with sorrow and anger. Even before entering the ruins, their electromagnetic field, or EMF, detector registered unusual spikes, signals not from power lines, but from an unseen source. Once inside, in a part of the house believed to be the former comfort room, the place where one woman was said to have been raped to death, the activity became frantic. The EMF meter, a device that detects anomalies in electromagnetic fields, spiked wildly. A REM pod, another sensor for close-range energy fields, went off constantly, beeping and lighting up with proximity warnings. A kinetic bell, meant to be activated by touch, rang on its own. The investigator, realizing the frenzied activity was centered around the comfort room, asked a direct question. Are you the lady who was abused by the Japanese till she died during World War II? The REM pod went absolutely wild. But then, a shift. The investigators noticed that the spectral presence seemed fixated on the bell and the REM pod, devices with lights and sounds. One of the team speculated that this was not a tormented woman, but the spirit of a child, also a victim of the house's horrors, perhaps a young girl who was merely curious or playing with the objects. When an investigator, believing he may have offended the spirit by removing the bell, later apologized to the kid alone, the EMF detector responded with 2 blinks for yes. To his question, "Are you mad at me for what I did earlier?" The presence seemed to be communicating in a way that suggested a trapped, hurt, and perhaps playful young soul. Using a spirit box, a device that rapidly scans radio frequencies to allow spirit communication, the investigators heard whispered words, "Sorry, then you'll see," and "Pearl." When asked what she was guarding, the voice replied, "I should. Safe." And finally, with a profound sense of urgency, when asked what she wanted, the response was a clear, repeated, and desperate, "Help. There, sir, help." A psychic stain of the Bahay na Pula is the sound of that cry for help, a plea that has resonated for more than 80 years. The Laperal White House and the Bahay na Pula are separated by hundreds of miles in radically different climates, yet they are twin houses of horror. They represent a single, devastating narrative, the memory of war as an active, living force. This is not a uniquely Filipino phenomenon. Across the globe, sites of immense collective violence retain their spectral signatures. The ancient Roman battlefields of Europe, the medieval towers of torture, the sites of mass genocide, all are reported to carry an energetic imprint of suffering, sometimes manifested as residual hauntings, where the actions and emotions of the past simply loop and replay, and sometimes as intelligent hauntings, where the spirit seems aware of the present. In the Philippines, the trauma of the Japanese occupation was total, affecting every class, every region. The war did not end cleanly. The wounds never fully closed. These houses act as focal points for a national collective subconscious burden, burdened by unresolved historical anguish, violence, and the injustice of unpunished crimes. The psychological explanation for the intense fear and phenomena at these sites rests on the concept of collective trauma and post-traumatic stress. For the living, the stories of the comfort women and the massacres are taught in schools and discussed in hushed tones. They are a national scar. When a person visits a site like the Bahay na Pula, the sheer weight of this collective memory is activated. The mind, already primed by history, folklore, and the visual cues of a derelict, historically charged building is hyper-suggestible. The sound of a floor creaking becomes a scream. The cold air becomes an icy touch. Fear breeds confirmation. But what of the true phenomena? The figures of smoke, the lights that fail, the sudden aggressive pounding. This is where folklore and belief step in to complete the narrative. Filipino folklore is rich with spectral beings and restless souls. The ghost, the kapre or giant, the aswang or shapeshifter. But the entities tied to these houses are not mythological monsters. They are kaluluwa, the souls of the dead, trapped by the violence of their passing. The most persistent, most violent spectral residue is that which is anchored by injustice. The spirits of the Lapral House and the Bahay na Pula are at their core spiritual victims of a grave crime that was left unatoned for. This lack of closure, this lingering need for justice or recognition is the supernatural tether that binds them to the earth. The young girl at the Bahay na Pula playing with a small bell as though it were a toy is not simply a ghost, she is a memory of stolen innocence, a perpetual state of childhood interrupted and locked forever in a place of torment. The sight of the White Lady at the Lapral House, a recurring figure often associated with a tragic family member but also the generic image of suffering, embodies the countless women who endured terror within its walls. The power of these places is the power of the unfinished story. The stories of the haunting of the Bahay na Pula and the Laparal White House have reached a global audience, becoming a staple of paranormal tourism. And as more people flock to these ruins, a strange phenomenon occurs, as evidenced by the stories of those who visit. The spirits follow them home. Aniga, a young woman from Manila, had a keen sensitivity to the paranormal, something that ran in her family. She and her workmates made a pilgrimage to the haunted sites of Baguio, visiting Teachers Camp, the Lapiral House, and finally the Diplomat Hotel, another site of immense wartime horror. At the Lapiral House, she felt a sudden surge of primal fear upon approaching the gate, a feeling that intensified when the caretaker recounted the home's grim history. The real terror began when she returned home. Anika shared a room with her sister in a house they knew to be modern and free of any previous unusual activity. But after her trip to Baguio, she felt a profound sense of being watched. One night, she woke to the sight of a shadow at the foot of her bed, the clear silhouette of a nun. She jumped up, switched on the light, and it was gone. Days later, her sister, who had not gone to Baguio, ran into the room, terrified, saying she had seen a woman, huddled and wearing a hood-like covering, sitting on Anika's travel bag, the very bag Anika had taken to Baguio. Anika researched her experience and came across a paranormal investigator's video where the investigator warned, "There are few of them left here because they join the people who visit and follow them outside. They come all the way home and stay there." Anika then confirmed her worst fear. The entity that had followed her was indeed a nun. She saw the figure in a dream, and upon waking, she saw the full dark form of a nun standing at the edge of her bed, staring down at them. The idea that the spirits are no longer passive victims bound by the geography of their suffering, but active, mobile entities that seek companionship or escape adds a profound layer of anxiety to the phenomenon. The theory is that the energy field of a living person, particularly one with a natural sensitivity, acts as a temporary anchor, a lifeline that allows the trapped soul to hitch a ride out of the prison of its trauma. The The spirit, locked in a time of intense terror, simply seeks a different location, a reprieve from the endless loop of its dying moments. The fear, then, is not just of the ghost, but of the contagion of trauma. You bring home the echo of the war, a small, dark piece of a national nightmare that now plays out in the quiet of your own bedroom. It is the perfect, chilling metaphor for how collective trauma is passed down through generations, unbidden and unwanted. The architectural design of the Bahay na Pula itself only enhances this sense of existential dread. One investigator noted that the long vertical pillars and the sloped floors of older structures, while merely architectural choices, can have a psychological effect on the visitor. Vertical pillars induce a feeling of strong, overbearing authority, and a backward sloping floor can create an unconscious feeling of being repelled or pushed out, a struggle against gravity that translates into a feeling of discomfort and dread. In the kitchen, a space where an old deep pit existed, possibly a basement or a cool storage area, the investigator felt a sense of being down under. This blending of the psychological and the spiritual provides a necessary framework for understanding the relentless fear. Scientific and architectural insights explain the physiological response, the chill, the unease, the feeling of being pushed. But the presence of an intelligent communicating entity, whether the playful child or the tormented nun, pushes the narrative beyond simple structural effects. It suggests a confluence of human despair and a persistent spiritual reality. How does a society come to terms with this? In a deeply Catholic country, the official theological lens often views the paranormal through the dual prism of the holy and the profane. A ghost, particularly one tied to violence and injustice, is seen either as a lost soul in need of prayer and intercession to find peace and move toward the light, or, more ominously, as a demonic manifestation capitalizing on human suffering and fear. The response from the victims in the stories is telling. Rachel's aunt prayed the Hail Mary. Anika repeatedly invoked the name of Jesus Christ. The first, instinctive response to the terror is a spiritual one. A desperate reach for the highest, most powerful light source to repel the darkness. The ghost, then, is a spiritual test, a reminder of the need for faith and ritual to keep the chaos of the past at bay. The truth is, these places are not merely spooky. They are sacred sites of immense national suffering, monuments built of pain and reinforced by fear. The White House and the Red House are the two sides of the same violent coin, a stark reminder that in the Philippines, the past is not dead. It is simply waiting in the fog or clinging to the edge of your bed. The mist is still heavy on the winding roads of Baguio, and the sun sets in a stain of crimson over the plains of Bulacan. We are left with the echoing voices of the past, the laughter of the prominent families, the marching boots of the soldiers, the desperate screams of the victims, the soft, curious voice of a child, and the urgent, whispered plea for help. How much of the fear we feel in these places is the truth of the war, and how much is the terror of realizing that our own collective anxieties, our current fear of conflict, of corruption, of injustice, are merely the historical trauma of the past given new voice? What happens to a nation when its ghosts are not random spirits, but the very real, unatoned for victims of its most brutal hour? And do not forget to submit your stories to our email, storiesphpodcast@gmail.com. Find show notes and support options in the description, access exclusive content on Patreon, and follow us on social media for daily folklore facts. You can listen to our previous episodes to hear more stories like this. We are all haunted in one way or another. History doesn't repeat itself, but it does often rhyme. The narrative now turns from the terrifying spaces themselves to the persistent, unresolved tragedy that binds the spirits to the Bahay na Pula. This is the story of the Malaya Lolas, the long, agonizing struggle for recognition, and the deep cultural belief that unatoned injustice condemns a soul to eternal unrest. The silence inside the Bahay na Pula is not the absence of sound, it is the absence of justice. It is a vast, suffocating quiet broken only by the whispers of those who remain trapped. We spoke of a young spirit, perhaps a child, who plays with the paranormal investigator's bell, who whispers the word help. This is the cry of the kaluluwa, the unquiet soul, tethered to the earthly plane by this single, most powerful spiritual chain, unatoned suffering. In the Philippines, the traditional view of the soul, the kaluluwa or the dungan, is not inherently malevolent. Ancestral spirits are often protective, revered, and respected. But a soul that is violently or unjustly ripped from the body, whose passage to the afterlife is blocked by an unpunished crime, becomes lost, wandering, and sometimes dangerous. They are not demons, but victims. They are not seeking to frighten, they are seeking to be finished. This spiritual reality intertwines with the brutal history of the Second World War. When the Japanese Imperial Army seized the house in Bulacan in 1944, they enacted a crime against humanity that remains one of the greatest unhealed wounds of the nation. They transformed the home into a military barracks and a sexual prison, where over 100 Filipino women and girls were held as comfort women, subjected to systematic, repeated sexual violence. The victims ranged from young teenagers and even prepubescent girls to older women. The terror these women endured at the Red House was the final, devastating chapter of a wider horror. In Mapanique, Pampanga, the Japanese soldiers conducted a massacre, torturing and slaughtering the men and boys before forcing the women to walk to the Bahay na Pula. The house, with its walls of red paint, became permanently stained with their suffering. One woman, a young girl at the time, was stabbed with a bayonet in her thigh for daring to resist. The survivors lived in physical pain, emotional agony, and the suffocating shame that a patriarchal society often unfairly heaps upon victims of sexual assault. For decades after the war ended in 1945, the survivors of the Red House and similar military brothels were forced into a terrible silence. They carried their trauma alone, their experiences buried deep beneath a lifetime of fear and societal expectation. They could not speak, for the shame was too great, the memory too raw. But trauma, like a restless spirit, never truly dies. It waits. The silence finally broke in the 1990s. Following the bravery of Korean survivors who began to speak publicly about their own wartime experiences, Filipino women found their voice. They formed the group known as the Malaya Lolas, or the Free Grandmothers. They were old women then, in their 60s, 70s, and 80s, but they were determined to reclaim the history that had been brutally stolen from them. They were no longer victims, they were witnesses. The Malaya Lolas demanded three things, demands that have echoed across the decades and are key to understanding why the spirits in the Red House cannot find peace. First, a public and unequivocal apology from the Japanese government. Second, just and commensurate compensation for the crimes committed against them. Third, the inclusion of their story in Japanese history textbooks, ensuring that the historical truth could never be denied. For 30 years, they have fought this battle, not on a battlefield, but in courtrooms, at embassy gates, and in front of the world press. They have stood for hours in the sweltering sun outside the Japanese embassy in Manila, their placards describing their ordeal, their voices weak with age but strong with conviction. They have watched as successive Japanese prime ministers and officials offered carefully worded statements that often failed to acknowledge direct government and military coercion, or attempted to resolve the issue with private funds, which the Lolas vehemently rejected. The women demand a government-to-government acknowledgement of the crime. This long, painful fight for justice is the earthly engine that drives the spectral activity at the Bahay na Pula. In the Filipino cultural mindset, a proper burial, a fulfilled vow, or a just resolution to an agonizing death is necessary for the soul to move on. The spirits of the victims, the men massacred, the women abused, and the children trapped are tied to the house because the world has failed them. Their cry of help is not a plea for immediate rescue, but for the closure that their living counterparts, the Malaya Lolas, are also desperate to achieve. The fact that the Philippine government itself has often been seen as unsupportive of their cause only compounds the national trauma. A United Nations Women's Rights Committee once found that the Philippines had violated the rights of the victims by failing to provide adequate reparation and recognition. This institutional denial, this collective failure to fully honor the Lolas in life, mirrors the abandonment that holds their spectral counterparts in death. The ghosts are a metaphor for the collective, national, post-traumatic stress disorder transmitted across generations. Without atonement, the wound remains open. The spirit of the child playing with the bell in the comfort room, the one who cried help, is a poignant symbol of this unresolved trauma. The innocent are trapped, guarded by an anger and sorrow so powerful that it overwhelms the very structure. The house, crumbling now into ruin, is a physical embodiment of the systemic breakdown of justice. The cultural impact of this unatoned crime extends far beyond the Bahay na Pula. It contributes to a sense of national powerlessness, a collective scar left by colonialism and war, where one group's suffering is denied by another. The spirits, therefore, haunt not just the house, but the nation's conscience. They are the constant, chilling reminder that until the living grant the Lolas the dignity and justice they deserve, the trapped souls will remain eternally bound to the place where their humanity was violently stripped away. The Malaya Lolas, now fewer in number as time takes its inevitable toll, continue their vigil. Every protest, every statement, every quiet recollection of their ordeal is an attempt to lay the dead to rest. They are fighting not just for themselves, but for the kaluluwa still trapped within the rotting, red-painted walls of the mansion. The question remains, when a crime of this magnitude is unpunished and the cries of the victims go unheard for decades, can the spirits ever truly find their way home? Or is the only thing left for them to do simply to haunt? The sun is setting now, casting long shadows across the fields of Bulacan, and the old red house seems to sink deeper into the darkening earth. The fight for justice, like the spectral activity within the ruins, continues, relentless and without end. If you have a story of your own, a personal experience that touches on folklore, history, or the unexplained, we invite you to send it to us at storiesphpodcast@gmail.com. Find show notes and learn how to support our work, including accessing exclusive content in the description or join our community on Patreon. We thank the Malaya Lolas for their courage and resilience, and we remember all those who were lost in the shadows of the war. Think of the trapped spirit in the red house, the one who asked for help. To forget the dead is to be truly abandoned. Will the day ever come when the Bahay na Pula becomes a silent memorial rather than an active, screaming archive of pain? Do not forget to like, subscribe, follow, and share this podcast. Support the show in any way you can. Details are in the show notes below. But before you go, pause for a moment. Look around you, feel the air on your skin, listen to the silence, because somewhere, right now, in a house just like the ones we've talked about, someone else is listening too. Maybe it's curiosity, maybe it's something older, something that remembers. Every time you press play, every time you lend your ears to these stories, you keep their voices alive. The restless, the forgotten, the ones who still whisper in the corners of our history. So thank you for listening, for remembering, for daring to step into the dark with me. I'm Paul, and this has been Stories Philippines Podcast. Join me again next time for another tale, another echo from the island's haunted heart. Until then, keep your lights dim, your prayers close, and never ignore the sound of a voice that says your name when no one else is there. Stories Philippines Podcast is brought to you by Hustle Studios.